They buried me last month. My daughter cried the loudest at my funeral and then cashed the check I left behind. What she didn't know was that I was still breathing. And the last thing I did after that will leave you speechless. It was a perfect funeral. That's the first thing I noticed when I watched it. From a distance, the church was draped in white lilies. A polished mahogany casket stood under soft, golden light. My photo, the one taken on my 59th birthday, rested beside a vase of roses. Someone had framed it too nicely, as if trying to make death look good. People whispered as they entered, all black suits and sympathy faces. My co-workers, my old friends, even the pastor who barely knew me, all there, mourning a man they thought was gone. And then I saw her, Melissa, my daughter. She stood at the podium, trembling hands, holding a folded piece of paper. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. Dad would have wanted this, she said, glancing toward the casket. He always believed in giving people a proper goodbye. The crowd sighed. Someone dabbed their eyes. If I hadn't been standing outside that stained glass window, watching it all from the shadows, I might have believed her too. They said I died in a car fire on Route 89. They found my truck twisted around a guardrail, burned to its frame. Inside they found a wallet with my ID, my wedding ring, and enough blood to convince the coroner. They found everything except me, because I wasn't dead. A storm that night had sent my car off the cliff. I remember metal screaming, the windshield shattering, the taste of blood and smoke. Then nothing, just darkness and cold water. When I woke up, I was lying in a stranger's cabin miles from the highway. A fisherman had pulled me from the river, half conscious and half frozen. I'd been out for 3 days. By the time I remembered my name, the rest of the world had already buried it. No one came looking. No phone calls. No police reports. Just silence. I assumed there'd been a mistake, until I saw my own obituary in the local paper. David Brooks, 62, dies in tragic accident, survived by his loving daughter Melissa Brooks. The obituary ended with, "He will be remembered for his dedication, his kindness, and the legacy he left behind." Legacy. That word hit harder than the crash. 3 weeks later, I walked back into town, same streets, same coffee shop, same people. But everyone looked at me like a ghost they didn't recognize. At my house, the driveway was empty. The mailbox overflowed with condolence cards. Through the window, I could see strangers sitting on my couch. A realtor's sign stood on the lawn. Sold. I froze. My life had been wiped clean and resold, and my signature was probably on the paperwork. That night, I found out where she lived. She had moved into an upscale apartment downtown. I waited outside, watching her through the glass. She was laughing, not grieving. Laughing. The next morning, I checked the insurance records. Melissa had claimed my death certificate, collected the life insurance, and drained the funeral trust I'd set up years ago, the one meant to pay for my burial. $250,000. All gone. It wasn't just the money, it was the speed. She didn't even wait for the ashes that weren't mine. I went back to the house. My house, one last time. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, still heavy with the scent of lilies from the funeral. My framed photos were stacked in boxes. My tools were gone. On the mantel stood my urn, filled with someone else's ashes, beside a stack of wedding invitations. Melissa Brooks and Thomas Hale, invite you to celebrate their union. The date was in 2 weeks. I stared at it for a long time. The girl I raised alone after her mother died, the one I'd taught to ride a bike, to build, to never lie, had built her future out of my grave. I sat on the edge of the empty couch, running my fingers over the urn, tracing my name printed on the label. My name, my death. Her prophet. My voice in my head was no longer trembling. My name was worth more dead than alive. Outside, the wind picked up. The world was quiet, too quiet for a man who'd just come back from the dead. Then I saw it, on the table, next to the invitations, a check stub from the insurance company, her handwriting scrawled across it, deposit $250,000. Memo, wedding fund. That was the moment something in me shifted. Grief stopped being heavy, it became sharp. I whispered to the empty room. They buried the wrong man, and I was done playing dead. You know what's worse than dying? Watching your family profit from it. And the last thing I saw that night before all of this, I was an engineer. Not rich, not poor. Just a man who built things that lasted. I built bridges, walls, machines, and a life for my daughter after her mother died. Melissa was 8 when cancer took her. I promised that night. When she turned 18, I added her name to my insurance plan. When I turned 60, I upgraded it. Funeral coverage, they called it. A polite phrase for I remember, so I thought I was buying her security. Turns out, I was funding my own betrayal. The night of the accident still comes, because by the time I woke up, 3 days had passed. The doctors said I was lucky. The world thought otherwise. Somewhere between the crash site and the hospital, someone decided that David Brooks was dead. The police found my truck, my ring, my wallet. The fire did the rest. The report read, "No body, no questions, just closure." And while I lay half-conscious in a stranger's cabin miles away, they buried my name and cashed it in. It took me 2 weeks to get back home. When I reached the edge of the neighborhood, the house looked different. Too many cars, too many lights. At first, I thought it was a wake, a vigil. Maybe grief had brought people together. But when I got closer, I heard laughter, glasses clinking, music. My own front yard was filled with people drinking champagne. A banner stretched across the porch. A celebration of life. David Brooks. I stood across the street, soaked from the rain, invisible to the world that had already buried me. Through the window I saw her. Melissa. She was wearing a black dress. Elegant, not mourning. Her smile was perfect, practiced. In one hand she held a glass of wine. In the other she held his. Thomas, her fiancé. They were laughing with guests, talking about wedding plans. My funeral was her engagement party. My chest burned. I wanted to walk in, to grab her by the shoulders and ask, "Who raised you?" But I didn't. I just stood there, watching as she toasted my death. "Dad would have loved this," she said, raising her glass. The room laughed. Someone shouted, "To David." I whispered to myself, "He's listening." When the guests left, I broke into the house. The smell of perfume and lilies still lingered. On the dining table, a neat stack of papers, envelopes, and checks. One of them bore the logo of Fairway Life Insurance. I opened it. Payment amount, $250,000. Beneficiary, Melissa Brooks. A copy of my death certificate sat beside it, signed by a doctor I'd never met. I sank into my old chair. Everything I had built for her, the house, the account, the trust, had been turned into cash. She didn't even wait for a body. The next morning I followed her to the bank, watched her deposit the check, watched her walk out with the same calm smile her mother used to have when she thought she'd done something right. But the world doesn't build monsters overnight. It takes time, it takes inheritance, it takes love misplaced in the wrong hands. I spent the next few days tracing every transaction. She'd paid off Thomas's debts, bought a car, and placed a down payment on the Green Monarch Resort, the same venue that was advertising a lavish wedding celebration for the Brooks Hale Union. My name was gone from everything, except the money that built it all. That night, I went back to my old house again. Through the window, I saw her sitting with Thomas at the kitchen table, planning centerpieces, tasting cake samples. My chair, my table, my daughter. I could almost hear her laugh through the glass, light and careless. And that's when the realization hit me. She didn't just inherit my money, she inherited my absence. I built her world brick by brick, and she sold it before I could knock. I stepped back from the window. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, tired, older, colder. That was the night I stopped trying to be a father. Fathers forgive, builders rebuild. But the dead? The dead collect. They used my death to fund their happiness, so I decided to live, just long enough to ruin it. They called it closure. I called it theft. And the last call I made that night changed everything. There's something twisted about hearing your own lawyer explain how you died. He didn't recognize me at first. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyes squinting over his glasses. I leaned forward. "Let's say a man was declared dead without a body. Would the insurance company still pay out?" He frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Technically, yes. After a certain period with enough proof." "How much proof?" he sighed. "Wallet, ID, maybe personal belongings. Depends on the beneficiary." I nodded slowly. "And if that beneficiary happened to be the man's daughter?" He blinked. The color drained from his face. "Wait, David?" I didn't smile. "Keep your voice down." He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he had. I don't understand. We held your service. Melissa filed." "I know what she filed," I interrupted. "I just need you to confirm it." He swallowed hard and turned to his computer. After a few keystrokes, the screen reflected in his glasses. My name, my policy, the payout amount. Beneficiary, Melissa Brooks. Paid in full. He exhaled. "She claimed it the week after the accident. The company expedited the process since I was so dead." I finished for him. He didn't answer. Neither did I. That silence between us was thick, the kind that carries the weight of both guilt and realization. Finally, I said, "I'm not here for the money. I just want to know where she's spending it." He hesitated, then whispered, "Her wedding. It's in 2 weeks. The Green Monarch Resort." I didn't thank him. I just stood up and walked out. Outside, the city felt louder than usual, again, too alive, too indifferent. I bought a newspaper from a street vendor. The entertainment section headline read, "Local heiress to host lavish wedding at Green Monarch Resort." Underneath was a photo of her, my daughter, in a designer gown, laughing into the camera with her fiancé, Thomas Hale. The caption read, "Forever starts here." I stared at her smile until my fingers went numb. "Forever's going to end on schedule," I muttered. I went to an internet cafe, the kind that still smelled of burnt coffee and old secrets, and started digging. The resort's site was filled with photos of crystal chandeliers, flower walls, champagne fountains. It screamed wealth, vanity, and self-congratulation. And in every shot, I saw pieces of myself. The money I'd earned, the life I'd built, the death she'd spent. The press release described the wedding as fully funded by the bride's family. I laughed out loud. Yeah, I whispered. Family. I tried calling her. The first time it rang to voicemail, the second she declined it. The third time, she picked up. There was a pause, just breathing on the other end. Then, Dad? Hearing her voice hit harder than I expected. Melissa, I said, we need to talk. Her tone went tight, careful. How are you even alive? I cut in. Long story. You want the short version? She stayed silent. The short version, I said, is that I trusted you. I left you everything, and you turned my death into your down payment. Her voice cracked. Dad, it's complicated. That word again. Always that word. Complicated. The language of cowards. No, I said coldly. You wouldn't survive if I did. The line went dead. That night I sat alone in a cheap motel room, the walls yellowed and humming with the sound of a flickering light. I laid out everything I'd collected, the insurance statement, the newspaper clipping, the wedding schedule, the resort's floor plan. The rage had settled into something colder, a quiet, steady pulse. Anger fades. Strategy doesn't. I learned years ago that destruction isn't about chaos. It's about precision. So I started building again, not with wood and nails, but with patience. I called the resort, pretending to be a reporter, writing a feature on luxury weddings. The manager cheerfully told me everything I needed to know, the date, the guest list, even the menu. When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. She was going to stand in white, surrounded by people applauding her. People who'd never know she'd built her happiness on a gravestone. And I wasn't going to stop her. Not yet. You can't destroy a structure while it's still being built. You wait until it's complete. Then you knock out the foundation. Over the next week, I watched from the sidelines. I saw the flower deliveries, the catering trucks, the decorations going up at the Green Monarch. I even watched her try on her dress through the boutique window, spinning under the light, smiling at herself in the mirror. I wasn't looking at a daughter anymore. I was looking at a thief wearing innocence. I took notes, names, numbers, timelines. By the time the last ribbon was tied, I knew every detail of her wedding better than she did. I was done mourning, done forgiving. I had built a life once. I could dismantle one too. They called it closure. I called it theft. And when I looked at the final guest list, I smiled to myself. There was one name missing. Mine. Perfect. Because when I returned, it wouldn't be as the man they buried. It would be as the reckoning they forgot to fear. You can't resurrect love. But revenge? That one always finds a pulse. They thought I was ashes in an urn. I was in the boardroom signing the papers that would burn their wedding down, and the last document I signed that week would make them wish I stayed dead. Revenge doesn't come with rage. It comes with clarity. They thought they'd buried me in peace. I was preparing their reckoning in silence. For a week, I did nothing but research. Names, ownerships, contracts, every layer of the wedding that my daughter built for my death. What I found made me smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The wedding wasn't just funded by the insurance money, it was sponsored, and a luxury event company called Elysium Events had arranged everything. The resort, the decorations, the press coverage. They specialized in perfect love stories. They didn't know they were about to host a ghost story. I visited their office under a new name. Robert Hensley, retired investor. A fake ID, a quiet demeanor, and an expensive suit can open more doors than any key. The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile. "Mr. Hensley, how can we assist you today?" "I'm interested in investing in one of your properties," I said. "The Green Monarch Resort." She blinked, surprised. "You mean the venue for the Brooks Hale wedding?" "Exactly that one." She hesitated for a moment. "That resort is partially under corporate review. The owner's selling shares to cover expansion costs." "Perfect," I said. "Let's talk numbers." That afternoon, I sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline. Across from me sat the resort's representative, a young executive, polished, smug, and drowning in debt. He tried to hide with a smile. He poured himself water and said, "So, Mr. Hensley, you're interested in a partnership?" "Not exactly," I replied. "I'm interested in control." His smile faltered. "I'll purchase 51% of your shares," I continued. "Effective immediately. Cash transfer, no delays." He stammered. "That's unusual. Don't you want to review the paperwork?" I leaned forward. "I don't buy what I don't understand, and I understand this. Your resort is sinking. I'm your lifeboat. Sign it." He hesitated, then nodded to his assistant. The contract slid across the table. When I signed it, something in my chest went still, not joy, not relief, just precision. "It felt poetic," I said quietly. "Signing something my daughter couldn't sell this time." The next step was technical. I didn't want chaos. I wanted theater, precision, symbolism, exposure. I called in favors, electricians, sound technicians, projection specialists. I didn't tell them who I was or why I wanted it done. Just when. The orders were simple. Replace the master power relay, install a timed blackout trigger, upload a new video file onto the main screen. The file was mine. I called it Truth.mp4. It started with photos. The funeral, the obituary, the checks. Then the insurance forms, Melissa's signature, the money trail. Finally, my voice recorded in one take. "For the guests of the bride, you're celebrating a wedding paid with a funeral, a toast to love built on the ashes of betrayal. I hope the champagne tastes like guilt." It was the first time I'd heard my own voice in weeks. It didn't sound angry, it sounded alive. 3 days before the wedding, I drove to the Green Monarch under the name Hensley again. The manager greeted me personally. "Mr. Hensley, everything's set for the upcoming ceremony. The bride's family spared no expense." I nodded. "Good. Make sure everything runs perfectly until it doesn't." He laughed, thinking I was joking. "Understood." The night before the wedding, I parked my car on the hill overlooking the resort. The place glowed like a diamond under 1,000 lights. Music drifted through the air. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing. I sat behind the wheel, watching. From that distance, they looked like a painting. My daughter in white, her groom smiling beside her, the guests laughing, clinking glasses under chandeliers, all funded by the ashes of the man they thought was gone. My hands rested on the steering wheel, calm and steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. I reached for the envelope on the passenger seat. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a mock newspaper front page I'd printed that morning. "Father declared dead found alive in Mexico. David Brooks returns home after being mistaken for dead." The headline was fake, but by tomorrow it wouldn't be. I glanced back at the resort one last time. Every light shimmered against the lake. Every window reflected perfection. But I'd seen what happens when perfection cracks. It shatters loud. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow I won't need to haunt them. I'll just show up alive. The rain started again, tapping lightly on the windshield. In another life, I might have turned the car around. In another life, I might have forgiven her. But forgiveness is for the dead. And I was done pretending to be one. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed the years, the scraped knees, the birthdays, the nights I carried her to bed after she fell asleep on the couch. Every memory had turned into fuel. At sunrise, I dressed carefully, black suit, silver tie, the same one I'd worn at my wife's funeral. If my daughter wanted a ghost, I'd give her one. But not the kind that disappears. As I stepped out into the morning fog, the world felt still, like it was holding its breath. By the time the first guests arrived at the Green Monarch, I was already there, unseen, waiting. The man they thought had turned to dust. And when the clock struck 11, every light in that palace of lies would go out. And every secret they buried with me would rise from the grave. They wanted a fairy tale. I gave them resurrection. And the last thing they saw that day will haunt them longer than my death ever could. Morning broke like it had been painted for them. Gold light, clear skies, no trace of rain. The perfect day for a wedding. The perfect day to ruin one. The Green Monarch Resort was alive with noise. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns poured through the glass doors. Reporters gathered near the fountain, cameras ready to capture the love story that conquered tragedy. Melissa looked radiant. White silk hugged her shoulders, her hair tied with the same pearls her mother once wore. If I didn't know better, I might have been proud. Beside her stood Thomas Hale, the man who smiled like he owned the world. He shook hands with businessmen, laughed with reporters, and waved at the crowd like a politician. To everyone else, he was the perfect son-in-law. To me, he was the parasite who'd feasted on my grave. The MC's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The ceremony will begin shortly." The orchestra swelled. Glasses clinked. Laughter rippled through the crowd. They had no idea what was coming. At precisely 11 a.m., the lights flickered once, then again, then silence. The chandeliers dimmed. The music cut. Whispers filled the room. "Is this part of the show?" someone joked nervously. On the giant LED screen behind the altar, static buzzed. Then the image changed. It started simple. A black background, white text. "In loving memory of David Brooks." A few guests clapped softly, thinking it was a tribute. Then the photos began. The first slide, my funeral announcement. The second, the insurance payout check, stamped paid in full. The third, Melissa's signature. The laughter stopped. Then my voice filled the speakers, calm, deliberate, echoing through every corner of the hall. "For the guests of the bride, you're celebrating a wedding paid with a funeral. They took my death and turned it into their party. Let me return the favor and by living." Gasps spread like wildfire. Someone screamed. The MC dropped his microphone. The video continued to teach my obituary, the forged documents, the deposit slips, the text message logs, each image sharper, louder, undeniable. Guests turned to look at Melissa, her face drained of color. She stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, this isn't..." Thomas grabbed her arm. "What the hell is this?" Then the ballroom doors creaked open, and I walked in. The sound was instant, 100 whispers, gasps, the clatter of glass hitting the floor. Somebody muttered, "It's him, he's alive." I stepped into the light, wearing a black suit and silver tie. The same outfit they buried me in. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. The click of my shoes against the marble echoed louder than the panic. Melissa turned slowly, tears streaking her makeup. "Dad," she whispered. "You're alive?" I stopped at the end of the aisle, hands clasped behind my back. "Surprise," I said softly. "You can't bury the truth." No one moved. Even the orchestra sat frozen, instruments limp in their hands. Thomas found his voice first. "You can't just walk in here." I cut him off. "Actually, I can. I own the place." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a brown envelope. It landed on the table with a sharp thud. Inside, and the legal transfer documents. Green Monarch Resort, 51% ownership, David Brooks. Gasps again. The reporter's cameras flashed like lightning. Ethan, or Thomas, or whatever mask he was wearing, went pale. "This is insane," he muttered. "No," I said. "Insane is spending a dead man's insurance money on your wedding." Melissa broke then. Her knees hit the floor, her veil trembling. "Dad, please. I thought you were gone. They told me." "Gone?" I interrupted. "I was gone for 3 weeks. You replaced me in 3 days." She reached out a shaking hand. "I didn't mean to." "But you did," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was final. The room began to unravel, guests whispering, the press rushing to film, security unsure who to protect. The screen behind me still glowed with her signature frozen mid-frame. I turned to the crowd. "You came to witness a union," I said quietly. "Instead, you'll remember a confession." Then I looked back at her. "I built your life, Melissa, brick by brick, and you sold it. For flowers and lies." Her sobs echoed through the hall. Thomas backed away, muttering something about legal counsel as he pushed through the crowd. I didn't stop him. He wasn't my target anymore. I stepped forward, picking up the envelope again, sliding it into my coat pocket. Then I turned toward the doors. No one dared to move as I passed. All they heard was the slow, steady rhythm of my footsteps. Outside, the storm had returned. Rain hammered against the glass, washing away the reflection of the ballroom lights. At the gate, workers were already hanging the new sign I'd ordered days before. Closed, until further notice. The letters gleamed under the rain, sharp and clean. I looked back one last time. Through the glass doors, I saw her, collapsed at the altar, white dress soaked with tears, the chandeliers flickering above like dying stars. Then I turned away. The rain soaked my suit, cold and heavy. But it felt right, like the earth itself was sealing the grave they dug for me. I walked into the storm, leaving behind the sound of chaos, of cameras, of a wedding that never happened. Revenge doesn't need blood, just timing. They spent my funeral money on their wedding. I made sure they'd never celebrate again. And somewhere between thunder and silence, I finally came back to life.